Welcome back to your Wednesday Buckeye Talk from cleveland.com. Doug Lesmerises, Nathan Baird, Stephen Means. We are ranking the depth of the Ohio State position rooms on this podcast. That's 9 groups that we're doing. Offensive line, running back, receiver, tight end, quarterback, defensive line. We're lumping the defensive line in together because they're all in with Larry Johnson. Linebacker, cornerback, safety. We will give a 1 through 10 rating from each of us on what we think the depth of that room is. And as everything, well, what is depth? Well, what does it mean to you? I mean, every time we do this, we spend 11 minutes on, well, what were your parameters? No parameter talk. It is what it is. Whatever number you wanted to give it is what you wanted to give it. You sitting there listening at home on the treadmill, in your car, out walking your dog, get some numbers in your head. Oh, what do I think? I think the depth in the safety room is what? So we're going to do that. It's in service of something. We don't have the numbers right now. We'll add them up as we go along. And as always, most of the good ideas on this podcast come from other people. So this was a texter who sent this in a call out a couple weeks ago. They wrote this from the 419. I think Ohio State has 2 really, really deep rooms. I think. Let's discuss quarterback, 2 deep 5 stars, a 4 star as a third stringer. And then the second one is the receiver room. What kind of context is out there for teams built like this? Is there a sort of a leading indicator for how this is going to unfold at Ohio State? Some of these guys won't see the field, but they're good players. Maybe just bring slightly different things to the table in the room. I won't complain about the talent, but it makes me wonder, how did the decisions by the coaches maybe style-based more than athleticism-based, because clearly they're all top athletes. How would you rank the criteria given last year's team for who wins out in these rooms? So we're actually not doing what they said. It's like, hey, they're saying like, hey, can you rank the depth of the quarterbacks and the receivers? And we're like, oh, they just said the word depth. We'll do a podcast on that. But thank you for getting the conversation started. Text subscriber in the 419. So that's interesting because I think we all have in our heads, wow, we think this one's deeper. We think this one's not as deep, but now we're going to spend an hour doing it. So Nathan, we're going to start on the offensive line, and we'll start with you. 1 is not very deep. 10 is very deep. How do you rate Ohio State's offensive line in depth?
So it's funny when you do things like this because depending on what order you are trying to gauge where that position is, I think it might change the number you give it. Because if you're on offense and you start with some of those other positions that we'll get to later, then when you start to put a number on the offensive line, I think it seems especially low. And now I'm wondering if I put too low of a number, but I said 3. I still think that there are a lot of questions lurking if the best 5 here, who we still have not identified, don't stay healthy. It's the one position on this team where I think that depth and the quality of the depth could be a direct reason why this season doesn't go the way Ohio State wants it to.
And I do think the age of the depth matters. Because like the depthiest depth here, Stephen, is pretty young, which you have to factor in because depth really is sort of like, how many guys would you be comfortable playing? Would you feel good about playing, Stephen? And age and experience has to be a part of that. What do you have, Stephen?
I have 4 for a lot of those same reasons. When I was trying to figure out what I valued most, the number one thing was just how many guys on this team in that position room are game ready, or at least will be game ready by the time we get to the season. Because those are 2 obviously different questions, but still, it didn't look great. You know, going from 2 guys right now who are probably game ready to 5 guys who I'm pretty confident will be game ready doesn't really help my confidence level because guys get abducted by aliens all the time. And so then I added in, okay, what's some base talent here that might be able to get there, like some 5 stars, maybe top 100 recruits for every group. Offensive line doesn't have much of that either. So I went with 4 because I'm confident that they'll get to 5 and potentially 6 just because one of those 5 requires somebody to win it and lose a battle. So, but other than that, I'm not really confident what happens, especially in the interior right now, if somebody goes down because yes, Jacob James, but also he is going to be coming back from an injury in the fall as well.
I do think we would see examples of like when this has been significantly higher on the offensive line. Nathan, if you think a couple years ago, Matthew Jones, we think is going to be a starter, doesn't wind up winning a job. They shuffle some guys around, but Matthew Jones is their 6th guy, winds up playing a decent amount a couple years ago. And it's like, okay, well, if Matthew Jones is your 6th guy, even though he didn't win a job in camp, He was in a fight. He'd been around. He'd played some snaps. He had been viewed as a top talent when he got here. And I think everybody going into, if we were doing this at that point of that season, you would have felt, well, it's not that people are uncomfortable playing Matthew Jones and he's your sixth guy up. I think right now, Nathan, there would be guys who are expected to start, who are going to have to start for Ohio State, who would be lower on the depth confidence level than Matthew Jones as the sixth guy would have been a couple years ago.
No question. I think that's a great point, and it's a stark juxtaposition because it was just, I can't remember whether it was 2020 or 21 when we talked, probably 21, right, where we were talking about how that might be like the deepest offensive line in the country. Like arguably, like we didn't, I don't think, go through and do a team by team comparison. We're just one of those things you threw out there because think about that offensive line. Like Paris Johnson couldn't play tackle on that offensive line. Matt Jones, who's now going to be a 2-year starter, pretty deep into his career, couldn't start on that offensive line. There were just too many good guys, and that was when you still had Harry Miller, we thought, as the starting center, and not Luke Whippler, another a 5-star guy like that. And now 2 years later, here we are, and we're saying like, oh, like a 3 out of 10. That's and like wondering like I think they will get to 5 starters, but we're talking about depth here. And I think center is a great look at where center is right now. We may feel better about some of these positions even by the end of the spring. We're only 6 practices into the spring. But look at center right now where you've got a second-year guy who hadn't ever snapped the ball before, whatever, until a couple months ago. Vic Cutler, who Ryan Day said is still, as of last week, adjusting to playing in the Big Ten. He's in like his 5th year of college football. And Jacob James, more of a developmental guy who on top of that is hurt. That's your center room right now, your center group. Like, and I know that means you can pull Matt Jones over, but then now it exposes your guard. So like, it's just, at first I was like, man, is this too low? And I think by Ohio State standards, I think it is this low. And I think it just kind of backs up all we've been talking about for a couple of years, getting to this moment, getting to this spring and having it be just kind of as bad as we expected it to be.
Okay, so I'll go 3 as well. So we're all in the same range here. So we're at a 3.3 total. And again, the context here is against the room itself in previous years and against the other rooms on the team. So this is not a, well, you know, if this Minnesota would be pretty happy with this offensive line depth. It's like, that's not what this is about. And it's also not about, well, what would Georgia think of this offensive line depth? It's your own standards and your own history that we're applying this to. And I think we just outlined how the history would tell you this room has been in a very different spot not so long ago. Let's go to the running back, Stephen. What do you have for the depth at running back? And again, we have to be able to slide this conversation around because you go for instead of looking for 5 guys, you're looking for 1 3/4, 2 1/8. You know, like you don't have to have as many guys. What'd you give this group?
I'm actually interested in what you guys did because I went high here. I'm at 9. I think they've got 5 guys that if you told me he was the starting running back for any given game, I'd be like, okay. I mean, whether it's, well, and really 4, we'll see with Evan Pryor because he's still got to get back completely healthy, but Travion's pretty proven when he's the best version of himself. Mayan's pretty proven when he's the best version of himself. Dallin got snaps he didn't think he was getting and wasn't supposed to get, proven himself. Chip Trayanum looked pretty good against Michigan for a guy who had been spending the whole year playing linebacker and didn't come over to that room until, 3 weeks before that. I'm pretty comfortable with all 4 of those guys to the point of, like, I might even root for, if there's any small nick and bruise, sit down this week. You're not playing. This guy's starting. Because we got to get to the end of the season with as many as you guys as possible. And I don't think any of them would even have a problem with it because there's so much depth, but also coming off of how last year went.
So this is another interesting semantics conversation that we can have for 11 seconds. Does the height of the top end matter in a depth conversation? Or is it just really number of guys you feel confident about? Because this group right now, and again, it depends on what you think Travion is, doesn't maybe have Bijan Robinson, right? But in number of guys that you could put on the field and feel confident in, it probably is legitimately 4 deep. And we were buzzing about Evan Pryor a year ago in spring. So if you go by what he's shown in practice, what his talent is, even though he hasn't really had a chance to show it at Ohio State, you might get to 5, Nathan. And if you're really just saying, no, it's the number of guys that you have confidence in, man, this group is way up there. Think about if it was like, hey, if you had to get to your fourth string left guard, how would you feel about that? Be like, oh no, fourth string left guard, like started last year and played really well against Maryland. We're great. That's where they are at running back, Nathan.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, it's both. I think the top end is a factor here, but it's both. You also have to have the quality of depth. And this is a position where I was stuck between two numbers and was going to maybe go decimal, but I think I'm just going to round up, and I think I'm going to call it an 8. Because Evan Pryor's health is part of the question here. But and to go back to what you're saying before, no, you don't compare this to the Minnesota standard. But I think if to have a room where if he's healthy, I think we can. I don't think we're going down off a cliff to say if Evan Pryor's healthy, that is the standard of the average Big Ten running back, right? So 100% of your room is Big Ten running backs, starting running back quality. Like that says something. That's pretty legit. And I think we may look back in November and think that this number is even low. If Trevion Henderson and Mayan Williams, because then right there too, that goes to the high end thing. Like we saw already last year, this isn't theoretical. One of those guys would be hurt, and so the other one would just go run for 125 yards by themselves.
So, there is a part of me that is now thinking the high end does not matter. That is not what this conversation is, because this is not a conversation of how good is your room. This is a conversation. It's not, what is it? It's how deep is your love?
Yes.
It's not how, right? It's how many guys would you feel comfortable putting on the field in a game now? Because they're not a 10 in how good is this room.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen, I am tempted to give them a 10 in how deep is this room, because we are just outlining a world, again, and people know this, Mayan Williams, Trevion Henderson, Chip Trainum, Dallin Hayden, Evan Pryor. That's 5 people. And by the way, if you needed it, I'm a 10. I'm a 10. If you needed it.
Because of number 10.
What's up, X? Hey, by the way, do you think you could carry it 12 times for 88 yards today against Notre Dame? He'd be like, I can do that. Okay, you're the 6th. I'm at a 10, Stephen. I'm at a 10.
You stole the entire point out of my mouth. I mean, that Georgia touchdown at the end of the first half, I think it was a Jackson play because Xavier Johnson came out of the backfield to score that. That was a scene from a running back.
But not even wrinkle. But you can line him up and run him between the tackles.
But also, they handed the ball off to him in that game. He had a big run a month earlier against Indiana as a running back. The best player on the team is Xavier Johnson, apparently. But I think this is not a. When you ask how good, you're talking about the top of the room. When you're asking about how deep, you're asking about the bottom of the room. And because obviously you take Bijan every time. If I gave you 3 options of you've got this room where it's literally potentially 5 guys you can just kind of throw out there blindly, and you might get similar production. Maybe you get something higher if Trevion's back to what he was as a freshman, but at bare minimum you get similar production from everybody. Or you have what 2019 was, where it's J.K. Dobbins and a bunch of and then, or you have nothing basically. J.K. Dobbins is a bunch of it's probably what you take first because you always take 2,000-yard running backs. This is a close second. If the other option doesn't exist, it's a close second to have in this situation.
And how this usually happens, Nathan, is difficult circumstances that require guys to play then builds depth for later. So last year was an unfortunate mess at running back for them, just trying to know week to week who's going to be on the field. And then when they put their best guys out there, how limited are they going to be because of the injuries they're battling, which applies to both Trevion and Mayan. They wind up playing a true freshman who nobody thought was going to have to play, Dallin Hayden, in super important spots late in the year. And then they wind up playing a guy who came to Ohio State to be a linebacker. They start him against Michigan in Chip Trainum. But the result is now, Nathan, well, we've seen it because those guys in the moment, we would not have been this high on depth a year ago with the exact same guys. It's the exact same guys.
Mhm.
Nobody left. Nobody came. It's the same people. Because the other guy, what's the guy's coming? Richard, what's his name? The guy coming in who's the running back this year that they're adding? Didn't they add one? No, they didn't add one?
They did not. Nope.
Oh, yeah, no. It's fine.
They had Mark Fletcher, and then he flipped to Miami. So.
Oh, yeah, no, that guy.
And,
so the whole thing is like they didn't – it's the exact same room, Nathan, but I think our belief in the depth is monumentally higher because they were forced to prove it.
well, Tranum was not in the running back room at this time last year, nor was he in there for a good portion of the season. That was a later addition. We weren't talking about him. In fact, they were saying he's definitely not a running back anymore. But no, I mean, your point is taken. And I think the best way, well, here's one way to gauge depth. Like I answered a Hey Nathan question recently from someone who was like, can we possibly still have all 5 of these running backs still on the roster by the fall? Because when your room is so loaded with people who they know can play and could be starters somewhere that they're worried people are leaving, that's how you know you got a pretty stacked room.
Okay, so I am going to give him a 10, which gives us an average of 9, which is going to take us to, I think, an interesting direct contrast. And again, we have to think about what we're evaluating here. And let's go to receiver. So the question is, so again, you have to think about it of like, okay, well, they have probably 5 guys they believe in, but they're trying to fill 3 spots, not 1 with those 5 guys. If Marvin Harrison Jr. got abducted by aliens, what is the level of confidence that we would have that they'd be like, okay, well, I mean, of course he's not going to be as good as Marvin. Nobody is. But, Nathan, we can feel confident in the guy who's going to play instead of him. Is that how we would feel? Not in a direct comparison to Marvin, but confidence in that guy on his own based on what we think he is and the experiences he's had in college football.
I think there should be relative confidence that there is like a borderline unlimited supply of Big Ten caliber starting wide receivers in this team right now, right? Like a lot of it we just don't necessarily get to see. But if that's kind of the standard you're judging it by, not that they have to be the best of Ohio State's best at all 3 positions, no matter how deep you go, but that you're going to get reasonable production out of that spot at worst. That's kind of what we're looking at. Yeah, I think that I think you do have that trust, and we saw it unfold last season when Jackson Smith-Njigba goes out, but yet, and not that that didn't hurt this offense, not that this offense didn't lack by not being able to have Jackson Smith-Njigba all year, but what they were able to put in kept that offense at a high level all season.
So what would you give this group, Nathan?
Having said that, I only gave this group a 9. This may be me too. There is a group that I did give a 10 to, and I may be like not wanting to blow the curve or whatever. So 9 was as high as I went on the receivers. You're a little young on the 2s and on down, but I think you have to believe in that talent. Like it's the guys who were the best in the country. That's who Heartline keeps bringing in, and now there's just a demonstrable pattern of results here too. That no matter what level they come in, they go out at a higher level from Ohio State. So it may be a soft 9 from me, or maybe is that a strong 9? Whatever, strong 9.
You're more between 9 and 10 than you are between 9 and 8.
I would say so, yeah.
Okay, Steven, what do you give this room?
I did not think this one would be a conversation. 10, and even if you lose Marvin, I go down like a 9.5. Emeka Ibuka is still on this team, and he just put up All-American numbers if he didn't have Marvin Harrison here. Julian Fleming was
okay.
I don't think he was 1,000-yard receiver last year. And I thought Julian Fleming was really, really healthy towards the end of the season. And I thought the Georgia game was actually his best game all year. He had 71 yards on 5 catches. I thought he was really good in that game. We just talked about Xavier Johnson. Jaden Ballard is good enough to play at worst in the Big Ten. He's probably wide receiver 2 for most Big Ten. At worst, he's wide receiver 2 at pretty much any other Big Ten school right now. He's 5 in this room because of what's ahead of him. And then, look, Carnell Tate seems to be coming along quite nicely. Noah Rogers seems to be coming along quite nicely. They're getting ready to plop Brandon Innes into this pretty soon. I understand that second-year guys have not popped, but there was always a chance that might not happen. But I feel pretty confident with the ones and the twos for Ohio State's wide receiver room, because your ones are the same guys from last year, basically, and your twos are Xavier Johnson, Jader Ballard, and one of these freshmen.
Yeah, I'm on a different place here with you guys, because if we're not focusing too much on how good the ones are, and we're really talking about how many guys could you put on the field and feel confident in, I think the idea that we have acknowledged many times, that Brian Hartline has acknowledged, that the second-year receivers are a little bit on notice, that the first-year guys might be coming for you, right? And we talked about Jaden Ballard kind of exists in a world of his own right now. He's kind of on this tier in between, and Brian Hartline was saying on Tuesday, hey, I kind of wish he'd been where he is right now 6 months ago. Unquestionable top line. But a year ago, when Jackson was lost, they kind of didn't skip a beat, because Emeka Egbuka, as a second-year receiver who was the number one recruit at receiver in his class, was ready to play that position, and you were totally fine having him not play on the outside, because Julian Fleming, as a third-year guy, was ready to do that also, right, on the outside. That's not where you are right now. So if something happened to one of the top three guys, here's who you have behind them. A third-year guy that Brian Hartline was saying, we're not putting a timetable on him, but I kind of wish he had been where he is now 6 months ago. A former walk-on who we love, but also just that. And then probably a true freshman. In a world where, Jackson Smith-Njigba wasn't asked to do much as a freshman. Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't asked to do much as a freshman. Garrett Wilson did stuff as a freshman. But we have not lived in that world. As good as these guys are, it is not typical to ask the true freshman to do a lot. That's not what this has been. But if Marvin was abducted by aliens, you're sliding, like Jaden goes over there, right? Or Julian goes over there and Jaden goes to Z, or Carnell is. I don't think it's really as deep, because and a chunk of this is because of that second-year group. That second-year group is not as ready to roll as the second-year guys often have been. And now you're reaching down and saying, Carnell, Brandon, you're not even here yet, but would you be ready to do something? That's asking something. So I am between a 7 and an 8 with this group in depth. Now, if you really are thinking about your depth, well, if you lose Marvin, you just throw the ball to Emeka 12 times a game and you're fine. And then Julian becomes your number 2. That part of the depth I agree with, right? Well, geez. But in terms of who you put on the field and feel confident in, you would start fairly quickly. If you had two things go wrong, you would start putting people on the field that you, at the moment, aren't 100% sure about, maybe, in terms of being a starting receiver at Ohio State, snap after snap after snap.
Well, but here's the thing. I get that vantage point. I would say, though, you could take a lot of those same arguments and make them reasons why this deserves a higher score. You could say, well, Jaden Ballard is, by Brian Hartline's own admission, not where he thought he would be at this stage. Then you also get to say Jaden Ballard is your 5, like kind of what Steven was saying before. Like there's no other.
But we have to be careful. He's not really a 5. He's a second team player.
Right.
So like the 5, we just have to make sure the 5 at receiver is not the same as the 5 at running back.
Yeah,
because Jaden Ballard is kind of like Mayan Williams or Chip Trainum.
I don't agree.
Right?
I don't think, because it's not
running back.
It's not 1 for 1. The same. It's like it's almost like how we talk about there's a 2D for the offensive line, but if something really happened to Carson Hintzman, they probably slide Matthew Jones over. Or at least we've seen that in the past, where if something happens to Luke Whippler, they probably just slide Matthew Jones over. There would be some sliding guys around to where if you say a guy is 5 in that wide receiver room, especially because of the body builds and stuff like that, you can kind of say it is like that, because they probably do just move Julian over and slide Emeka outside and then put Xavier Johnson in the slot. Like there's some other moving pieces that happen before Jaden Ballard still gets on the field. So I do still think it's fine to say he's 5.
But listen, okay, so say you had to go to your second team guy, right? So say something happens to a starter, and now somebody has to play a lot. At receiver, the next guy who would have to play a lot is either Jaden Ballard or Xavier Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
At running back, the next guy who would have to play a lot is Mayan Williams. Like, what's the better depth there? I would say Mayan Williams.
I get why you say that,
yeah.
But I think number 2, but also Ohio State's number 1 guy in its wide receiver room is a lot better than Ohio State's number 1 guy in the running back room.
No, I know, but that's it. But like, I'm not factoring that into a depth conversation.
But the way you're kind of, talking about this right now, you in this one little hat of conversation, you kind of have to, because that's part of the point you're making here. I don't agree with the freshman thing. I think last year's group of freshmen were, first of all, they were already lower rated, and they had some other issues with some of their work habits. That's why they're behind. This group of freshmen is higher rated and also doesn't have that problem with their work habits. I understand we haven't seen a true freshman play really since Garrett, but also look at the room Garrett was in as a true freshman, and look at the rooms these last couple of like Jackson Smith-Njigba wasn't playing in 2020 over Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson when he basically had a ruined offseason because of COVID. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka were not getting on the field to share time with 3 first-round picks, one of which was the Offensive Rookie of the Year this past season in the NFL. It's just a room, with the wide receiver room only, the ceiling of that room and floor have been raised so much that just being a talented freshman isn't enough. But I don't think Garrett Wilson would play as a true freshman in the 2022 room. But I do think that Marvin Harrison, Emeka Egbuka, Jackson Smith-Njigba, especially as true freshmen, would play in that 2019 room.
I think that's a fair way to look at things. I also think, to finish the point I was making before, I considered that first year, second year thing that's going on right now in my score, but it also factored into why my score was higher, because I feel like the quality of guys who are coming into this program as true freshmen are part of why this depth is what it is.
And I think there's also a different thing between long-term depth, the health of the room overall, and depth right now if you needed guys. So I'm thinking of more of like right now. Like if you needed to play guys right now, long-term health and depth, it's like, my gosh, look at these freshmen they have stacked up. They're going to be great next year, and especially in 2 years. Like the cycle, right? The assembly line of talent is rolling. And we don't have that same kind of feeling. Like the running back room, you're not like, oh, they're set. They don't even need anybody. They can stop recruiting for a year. That you want to add because you're looking for like another number 1 guy as good as. But right now, I actually feel like if they needed it, if they had to play guys because things happened, I actually feel better about the running back depth than I do the receiver depth in that framing. So I'm going to give the.
Yeah, it's tough.
Go ahead.
It's also a position where you only need 1 guy, as a position where you need 3 guys. That's a hard thing to completely erase as you're making this judgment, I think.
No, but we have to. But also, it's not. But the point is, at running back, we just said like if you said you had to play Dallin Hayden tomorrow, I think we'd feel okay. If you said you have to play Carnell Tate tomorrow, I think we all think Carnell Tate's going to be great. Moxie, guys showing it this spring. But I think I'd rather play Dallin Hayden tomorrow because Dallin Hayden's been through it. So, and I think they're certainly at similar positions of depth in their room, that they're not the next guy up, but like they're not that far away from being needed. So, people can view it different ways. Again, the parameters matter a little bit. I'm closer to a 7 than I am a 9 with my 8, though. So that gives us an average of a 9. When we come back on Buckeye Talk, we'll get to the rest of the offense, then slide to the defense right after this. Doug Maurice, Nathan Baird, Stephen Means, 614-350-3315 if you want to be a text subscriber. Stephen, tight end. What would you say for this group? This is Cade Stover, G. Scott, Joe Royer, Sam Hart, Jelani Thurman. Patrick Gerd, number 49. walk-on tight end. That's a lot of bodies, Steven. What do we give the rating?
I gave it a 10 because they're just going to go 10 personnel and call it a day because the wide receivers coach is now the offensive coordinator. Love it.
So again, he's the offensive coordinator. He is not the head coach of the offense.
I know.
So there's still a guy in the building.
Yeah, there's still plenty of 12 and 13 personnel that we're going to see this year. And because of that, I gave it a 3. I trust base with my heart, soul, mind, body, whatever you want to say, because Cade Stover proved himself last year in every facet. Now, there's still some run blocking times and then like some out in space blocking in those bubble screens where I think he needs to clean up. But for the most part, full confidence in what Cade Stover brings to this table. And then it's like, G. Scott is now in year 3 of his tight end transition. Joe Royer is in year 4 of that transition, and there's a battle there. I think they need both of those guys to be ready to play football this year to do what they want to do. But right now, I don't know if I can confidently say that will happen, even if I do like some of the upside both of those guys maybe bring to the table there. But where things are right now, if they had to play a game tomorrow, there's probably like 40% of this offense that they just kind of goes to as normal money plays on a given week that they can't use right now because they don't have more than one tight end. So I gave it a 3 because of that.
Nathan.
Not too far off. I called it a 4. I do wonder if our perspective on this is so skewed by the Ohio State usage of the tight end. Like,
yeah,
from a just a pure talent standpoint, if you took these guys and gave them to Iowa, would they think that this is good tight end depth?
No. Iowa would not. No. Don't use that example. Iowa's like the best tight end school in the country.
I would need 7.
Brian Ferentz would kick these guys out of the room.
Fine, but like Wisconsin, I'm thinking of just like other teams that actually use a lot of tight ends. Like, but I'm trying to gauge like how good are Joe Royer and G. Scott by an offense that would actually use them a lot, as opposed to here where it seems like we're not seeing them on the field. But part of that is because of other dynamics that are here. But I think at the end of the day, we did see some things. I'm going back to the Georgia game, and when Cade Stover was out of the Georgia game, it was conspicuous. So they have to get to a place between now and September where if Cade Stover does have to come out of a game, it doesn't look as bad. And they're not going to be playing Georgia every week. And I'm not saying Cade Stover will ever leave the field. Maybe he won't. He's a pretty tough guy, but he does get banged up a lot here and there. And they've got to get to a place where there's other guys they can trust, where they don't look just lost at times. And that happened in some big moments in that game. So that's why I think right now all you can give it is something like a 4.
All right, so I will also give it a 4, which means that, Nathan, you and I slightly rate the tight ends ahead of the offensive line, and Steven, you slightly rate the offensive line ahead of the tight ends. That Nathan and I are 3 on offensive line, 4 on tight end, and Steven, you are 4 on offensive line, 3 on tight end. I think it's all in the same range. I think that G. Scott is in year 3 of this transition. Gives some reason to think, okay, you can get there a little bit. But I think it's in a very similar spot. I do think, again, depending how much you care about the top, Cade Stover on the top, that's a more locked in thing than what we're talking about maybe at the tackle spots on the offensive line and that kind of thing. But again, that's a piece of the discussion when it comes to depth. And by the way, they're ahead of where they were this time last year when we were like, they literally have no tight ends. And then they're like, Cade Stover will do it. We were like, he is a linebacker. And they were like, it'll be fine. And we said, he is a linebacker. And then by mid-October, we were baby Gronk mode. We love the babies. They love the babies. Baby Aaron Donald, baby Gronk is like Farmer Gronk.
Farmer Gronk, but yeah.
Yeah, Farmer Gronk is better. I'm out on baby Gronk. There's basically every tight end now that catches a pass. They're like, oh, baby Gronk. Like, let's come up with something more creative than baby Gronk.
If they run a robot arm and they're kind of buff as a tight end, they call him baby Gronk. And if they have if it looks like they go to a black barbershop, they're Travis Kelce. There's other tight ends in the NFL, guys.
I'll let you come up with that Joe Royer nickname then, or whoever.
Yeah.
Joe Royer needs to stop cutting his hair because it's beautiful.
The big, just like, I like it when you pull off your helmet
and
it's
curly
like,
fro. Love it.
I do think that there is definitely a part of this that you don't. Gronk has made a living of like, hi, I'm Rob Gronkowski. I'm in a commercial and I can't read. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
Like, does not compare anybody to Gronk. No one has leaned into their lack of intelligence as a brand like Rob Gronkowski. Every commercial he's in, it's like, let's go to this giant idiot over here. Tom Brady is my friend. Where's my check? Cade Stover's not like that. Okay, 2 4s and a 3. Steven, we'll start with you again. Quarterbacks. And this is one of those things where I think you have to think to yourself, in 2019, what would you have given the quarterback room? Because that year, the top was Justin Fields. Everything after that was, please, let's not have them have to play anybody. That's what Ohio State was thinking.
Yeah.
So that's in a world where like Gunnar Hoke is coming from Kentucky to, right, and Chug's still around, right? But this is not. So that's the kind of thing you have to think about. What would you have given that room? Headlined by a 5-star who everybody expected to be great. But take him away and you were in a world of hurt. So now where do you assign a rating to this group, Stephen?
Yeah, I think quarterback is always the hardest because it's obvious. It's the depth that doesn't matter until it matters in the same way other places do. And so you can't, yes, you need another quarterback because things can happen, but you can't be coming in with that mindset every week. You just have to expect that your quarterback, if you're going to play 87 offensive plays, your quarterback's going to play 87 offensive plays for you.
What? Oh, no, I completely disagree with that. I think you have to come in a mindset with like, our quarterback is a twisted ankle away from coming off the field. Our 2 better feel like a 1.
And for that reason, I gave it a 7. It was really in the depth, but we're doing whole numbers, but I was really more 7.5. But I'm leaning more towards a 7 because from what we saw last Saturday and probably what we'll see this week, I like where Kyle McCord is headed in year 3 as a year 3 guy. And I like some of the growth I saw from Devin Brown, but I left the Woody feeling like Ohio State's quarterback's room is going to be fine. The quarterback play will be fine. Whatever that looks like, it'll be fine. I thought that beforehand, but now that I actually got to see it with my own eyes, it's like, they'll be fine. At worst, they'll be an all Big Ten quarterback. At best, they're sitting in New York again.
Nathan, what did you give them?
So I also came down on a 7. It feels low to me because at the same time I'm saying it's a 7, it also almost feels like the ideal if this goes according to plan. Like if Kyle McCord wins this job and Devin Brown sticks around and you've got Tristan Gebbia as that kind of experienced guy at the 3, he looked pretty good in the scrimmage, I thought. And then you got a freshman coming in who's a solid guy. Like that almost seems like the ideal setup, but I do think you have to ding for one reason, and that's if Kyle McCord doesn't win the job, all of a sudden this is a thinner room, and realistically, and I don't know that I see that in any other position that we're talking about, where like one job decision this spring, maybe it doesn't happen until the fall, but if it happens this spring and the person leaves, that changes dramatically how I look at the depth of this team. So that's why it's a 7 that I feel like should probably be higher, but that's what I came down on.
I do think Tristan Gebbia is worth a point here.
Yes.
Because you're bringing in a guy who has started multiple games at Oregon State, and he's your 3. And so if you really, right, okay, now you're 2 alien abductions away. Can you put somebody on the field who could competently run some version of the offense? I think the answer is yes. I think without him, the answer might be no, because then you're at a freshman or a walk-on, and a freshman who's not even here right now.
Right.
So I'm at an 8 because I agree with basically everything you guys are saying, but I'm going to give him a nod for bringing in a transfer who kind of knows what's up. And he'll be unknown and not thought about. And if we get to November and there are 2 alien abductions, this guy is going to be the most important guy in the state of Ohio because he's going to be the guy in charge of getting the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. for a team trying to win the national championship. And so I think that really matters. So I'm in the same range. Top end again. I think you can almost do two separate ratings here. Like what's your ceiling, what's your depth for every position room. The ceiling here is not as high as some other places because we just don't have the experience. Like, wait, maybe you can get there, but like, what's the Marvin Harrison Jr. ceiling like right now? This room can't approach that right now. But a competition lends itself to depth. Because it's not like, well, we're playing this guy and then we don't know behind that. It's like, oh, well, we're trying to see. The two in that room is probably going to be pretty good because at the moment, there's a possibility he's going to be the one. So I think what you're talking about, you have to think about, well, what will it be by the time you get to the fall? But I think this is actually in a pretty decent spot. And I would give, as we wrap this up, Nathan, which room in the depth conversation would you rank higher? 2023 Ohio State quarterback room or 2019 Ohio State quarterback room? Justin Fields and then not so sure behind it.
No question.
Okay.
23.
So would you like we'd be talking about like a 3 or a 4 for the 2019 room? As good as Justin Fields is?
Yeah, maybe a 5, maybe a 5.
No, I might go down to 2 or 1, and that's factoring in how QB1 plays football. Where
if you're talking about
you're always an injury away. Well, you're definitely always an injury away when your quarterback is using his body the way Justin Fields did, and also got hurt.
But you're right. 5 would be way too high because if we're doing this in the spring of 2019, Justin Fields isn't actually yet Justin Fields. He's the guy that was highly ranked, but then had this year at Georgia where they kind of only used him in running packages, and maybe Doug the part of 9-3 Doug is Justin Fields a little loose with it? Is he as accurate as he needs to be? All that stuff. So no, you're right. It's probably 3 might be our ceiling on that room in the spring of 2019.
And as it turned out in 2019, the starting quarterback was healthy Justin Fields. The backup quarterback was injured Justin Fields.
Yep.
It's like, oh, Justin Fields, did he get his leg ripped off? It's like, oh, well, he's still playing. Okay. Great.
And he was pretty good. Injured Justin Fields was basically a broken off route away from reaching the national championship game.
Yeah.
And he beat Michigan.
2-legged Justin Fields is the 1. 1-legged Justin Fields is the 2. And like Justin Fields crawling around on all fours, dragging himself through a play is the 3rd string quarterback.
So actually, let's look at that. Fully healthy Justin Fields probably wins the Heisman. Unhealthy Justin Fields almost reaches the national championship game. Unhealthy Justin Fields in 2020 reaches the national championship game.
Yeah, he's his own backup. So, okay, so we're going to go 2 7s and an 8 in the quarterback room. That gives us a 7.3. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball, Nathan. We'll start on the defensive line. It's the biggest group. Again, I thought about breaking it up, but they give them all to Larry Johnson. They don't have a defensive ends coach here. They don't have an interior defensive. Some teams do it that way. They have a rush end guy. Larry Johnson's in charge of all these guys, so I lump them together. Nathan, what do you have for the defensive line?
And it was funny. I didn't realize at first when I started making my list that you had put them together. I went back and checked the text, but I had the ends and the tackles actually with the same ranking, the same rating. I'm calling it a 7. I think it is the group though that maybe is trending up the most this spring. So we're actually seeing Kenyatta Jackson make some flashes. We're, seeing what they're doing with the defensive line alignment and that they trust guys like Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams, maybe as much or more than we thought they were at the end of last season. And that someone when you start talking about like Mike Hall being with the 2s, that's pretty impressive. There are just still some unproven elements. It's the position where, other than maybe receiver, where the guys you're talking about that at that 2-3 level have a lot of promise, but are also just pretty unproven. So it's how much confidence are you going to put in that at this point?
All right, 7 for Nathan. Steven, how about you?
I actually asked Larry about this, ideally how many he wants. He said 10. He wants 4 outside, and then 5, and then 4 inside, and then an inside guy who can play either tackle spot, and then another swing, outside guy just for the sake of having another guy. I think right now, by the end of spring, they're going to have 7 surefire that I'm comfortable with them playing with. 4 of them are on the outside. And so I don't think that's a good thing for the defensive tackles right now. That it's yes, the ceiling, the top end is pretty good with, at least we think it is, with Mike Hall, Ty Hamilton, and Tyleik Williams. That's not enough to get through a season. Jaden McKenzie is now in year 5 here. This is kind of, if you're going to be like one of those late blooming defensive tackles that we've seen in the past, it's time to do that now. Hero Kanu has shown some things, but he's still working with the threes. This might be a spot where they might hit the transfer portal after the spring is over. They had already had a kid from Maryland who was playing at Maryland last year and is from Winton Woods on campus earlier this spring. The defensive tackle depth right now is a big question mark, but I do agree with Nathan that on the edge, your top might be really good if Jack and JT are what we thought they were as recruits in year 3. And then Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson have done enough flashing, whether it's during the season with Caden Curry or now with Kenyatta Jackson, that you feel comfortable there. And then I like where Amari looked physically coming off of that knee injury he had last year.
What was that score?
What's that?
What was the score?
Oh,
what's
6.
your score?
6. Being heavily propped up by the defensive ends.
So I actually thought there was another defensive tackle. I imagined a defensive tackle because I was like, well, they have Mike Hall, Tyleek Williams, Ty Hamilton, and that other guy. And it's like, what other guy? There isn't another guy because they usually have so many guys that you can roll through. Mm-hmm. So I just lowered my grade because I imagined a player. Because I do think, for instance, to me, Caden Curry, who did a tiny bit last year, at least got his feet wet a little bit. And then Kenyatta Jackson, what we are very excited about what we're seeing this spring. And it's like, well, he has a foundation. He's sitting having hour-long conversations with Paris Johnson after practice last year. They laid that kind of stuff down. So that, to me, that's like a difference. Those are the guys that they're relying on at the twos, at defensive end, which is different than the receiver room. Because the receiver room, we're talking about the first-year receivers maybe moving past the second-year receivers, right? So that, to me, hey, it feels, okay, defensive end, you have 2 guys you really believe in. You did lose Zach Harrison, but the second-year guys laid something down that they're ready to build on, even though we haven't seen much of it. So I had him at an 8, but then I realized I imagined a player because you make a good point, Stephen, about the defensive. They often, in the spring even, they're often 5 or 6 deep at defensive tackle, and they really are 3 right now. And then you're looking for Hero Kanu or somebody young to really jump up and do something, or you're looking in the portal. So, Stephen, you have him as a 6. Nathan and I both have him at 7s. I think that's pretty reasonable. But you do, and again, the top end conversation, we know what JT and Jack we think are capable of. You want to see more of that. But that defensive tackle thing is something to keep an eye on. That maybe they're going to need to add somebody there. I'm curious to see what this post-spring portal situation might be like for Ohio State. Both out for a couple guys and in, maybe more in than you would normally think, because there just might be a spot or two where they could use a guy who would be in August like fighting for real playing time. All right, last break. When we come back, 3 more defensive groups next on Buckeye Talk. All right, Nathan Baird, we'll start with you on this one again. Linebacker, what do you have for this room?
Linebacker was my 10. You have just kind of crazy talent, second-year talent, lurking at the 2s level right now. And someone like Cody Simon, who now has as much experience as he has, is really seen as sort of like the swing backup, because the 2 guys that you have at the top are considered so reliable and guys that need to be on the field that much. I mean, you only need 2, and they have 5 guys, I think, right now who are either appear to be playing at like or could be reasonably expected to start this fall, or trending in that direction. And it's not super deep in terms of numbers, but the quality of every guy they have right now is really strong.
What you got, Steven?
I have a 10 too. I think it might be deep, just given they're only playing 2. And if you feel like you've got, 4 who are game ready, and then your 3s are guys where they seem like they're at least coming along, I think that's a fine room when you only play 2 spots. They have 2 starting units in my head with Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers. Tommy Eichenberg literally was an All-American last year, and Steele Chambers still looks like he's climbing up that ladder with his potential as a linebacker. If they got abducted by aliens 2 days before the Indiana game. And you told, well, not 2 days, a week before the Indiana game. And so now we're going into that week thinking Cody Simon is your Mike and CJ Hicks is your Will. I'd be like, okay, cool. So CJ Hicks is going to start his All-American campaign.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I do think, again, this is where I'm not trying to make the same point again and again, Buckeye talk. What's part of why you feel good about the depth at linebacker? Because you have second-year guys with talent that you think would be ready to do something. And you just wrote about that, Nathan, on Wednesday morning. Gabe Powers as an example of what we talked about with Jim Knowles on the Tuesday pod, Jim Knowles saying, go dominate the twos. You look at CJ Hicks and Gabe Powers and say, okay, we think they'd be ready for more. They laid something down last year. And that's not exactly what you don't necessarily think of the second-year receivers in the same way. So I gave these guys a 9. I am agreeing with everything you guys said. I think you probably go 5 guys for 2 spots that you would feel good about, and then you'd get down to Reed Carrico and like moving Chip Trainum back to the linebacker room or whatever, which is what he was supposed to do anyway. And so I think there's a lot of reasons to feel really good about this. Nate, Steven, we'll go to you for cornerback. What do you have for that room?
I gave it a 7, one of those 7.5s again, just because I feel good about it within the context of who they're going up against this spring. I think they've got 4 that they can play, which is pretty quality. But when the thing that pulled it down a little bit for me was us talking to Knowles on Tuesday and him saying that, he might start taking some of the corners to play nickel, especially those second line guys, which chips at the depth. You can very easily go down to 3 because of that. They are in a position, it feels like, where you can rotate 3-2 spots if you really want to. But I have to be cautious with this room because we were here last year talking about they might have some depth here because Jordan Hancock and J.K. Johnson might catch up as top 100 recruits who have been through an offseason now. And look at what Denzel Burke did as a freshman. And yes, Cam Brown, he has moments, but also we know he's going to get injured, but it's okay because of those backline guys. And then we got to August and the depth just started getting chipped at, and it never really got right the rest of the season. So you have to be cautious with where they are, because I feel like we're saying the exact same words we were saying a year ago about these cornerbacks right now, or at least starting to.
I do think Davison Igbinosun is a big move here. I think he's worth at least a point, Nathan, when you're trying to think about this, because especially losing J.K. Johnson, right? You had to add somebody, and he seems to look like he can handle this. And then Jair Brown seems like a guy who at times last year got some stuff under him. And so if that's your top 4, Burke, Hancock, Igbinosun, and Brown, without the transfer, Nathan, I just think you'd be in a significantly different spot.
No, that's the one note that I wrote down on my thing was like Igbinosun really changes how you look at this room. I was a little more I think I'm very much in line with what Steven said, but I was more cautious in my score. I called it a 6. At the bottom of the room, you still have someone like Ryan Turner, who we don't really know exactly where he is at. You got 2 true freshmen coming in of the 7 scholarship guys, one of whom won't be here till the summer, even though those guys are highly thought of guys. But the other thing that I keep coming back to is it does have to be like performance does matter. And there were performance issues at the top end of this room last year. Also, some of it injuries led to it, but that was also an issue. So how healthy is Jordan Hancock, and will he actually play better when he's on the field next year? Will Denzel Burke have completely put behind him the things that were bothering him last year and perform better? Like the bodies are there. I think I am still in a kind of need to see it mode from a performance standpoint.
I agree. Same kind of thing. I'm at a 7. So that's a 6.7 overall rating for us. 2 7s and a 6 for the cornerbacks. And we'll wrap it up, Nathan, with the safeties.
This was one where I thought I might give another 10 first. And then when I started considering, when I compared it, I guess maybe especially to the linebacker room, I couldn't quite get all the way there. So I actually ended up at only an 8. But it's the only room where if you took the top layer off, I guess here's the way I would look at it. If you took the top 3 out, and they're about to play Michigan based on like today, like whatever prediction you would give the Michigan game today, and you were told, well, the three safety starters though can't start. It has to be the next three. Does it substantially change your prediction of that game? Like
No.
based on the ones and twos we've seen this spring, I don't know that it does. I think I would look at it about the same. I am not. Again, I don't think the top end is as secure in terms of what we've seen them do as it is Eichenberg and Chambers in the linebacker room, for instance, or certainly the receivers. There might be a little bit more of a ceiling on what the best guys in the safety room do, but in terms of going down to 6 and really beyond that, it's a really strong room.
So just to reset this again very quickly, what we've seen with the ones is Lathan Ransom, Josh Proctor, and Cam Martinez. What we've seen with the twos is Sonny Styles, Kai Stokes, and Jihad Carter. And then sort of the floating seventh safety is Court Williams, who is still trying to get healthy. Steven, what'd you have?
I gave this an 8. I think it's another group that's well on its way to having 2 starting lineups, where I wouldn't have a problem with either one you threw out there. With the wrinkle that Lathan Ransom was actually the bandit still, and Josh Proctor is playing adjuster. And so that's interesting. I think it probably puts Josh Proctor more in the mindset of what we were thinking of him when Ohio State just had the single high safety. As you know, you're looking at that skill set, even if it's not always a single high safety out there. That's an interesting wrinkle. But it's another group, like I said, you have 2 legitimate starting lineups. At least they're headed in that direction right now. And both lineups have reasons to be very optimistic. Lathan Ransom was very good last year and still had some room to grow, while that second unit has Sonny Styles in it. Well, also Kai Stokes is 2 guys whose upside might be very high as well. So I gave it an 8.
I gave it a 9, which is higher than the receiver room for me. Which again is like, let's talk. This is both positions require 3 guys on the field. Let's talk top 6. When we get, we're talking top 6 with the safeties. We're not talking about any freshmen, any true freshmen. We're not talking about any former walk-ons. And you're talking about all guys, one of the guys a transfer who started, right? So again, it's just trying to compare things a little bit. I agree with everything you guys said about how you view this group. I think that point is very well said of. If you just took out the first team, could you put in a hockey shift change of the second team safeties and feel okay? That's a big thing. That's a good way to think about depth. So overall, that means we are at an 8.7 with the safeties. So let's go back and now figure out who won, how we rank the depth on this team. Number 1 for our depth ranking is the linebacker room. They are a 9.7. Tied for second, running backs and receivers both at 9. Nathan, what do you think about the idea that those 3 rooms won the depth conversation with the linebackers on top?
I mean, it part of that is a reflection. The linebackers are on top in part because of Jim Knowles coming in and changing the defense a little bit. If we had to spread that across 3 starting spots, we might grade it a little bit differently. So that's one dynamic that changes there somewhat. But also the strength of the linebacker room is one of the reasons why the running back room is stronger, because you move Chip Trayanum over there. So they play off of each other.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, hey, I'm not sure about our depth. What if we just eliminate a position? It's like, oh, no, that's okay. But also a year ago, we were talking about, right? Weren't we talking about 9 linebackers for 2 spots? And then, like, what happened?
Yeah.
Chip Trayanum changed rooms. Paille's gone, right? Didn't play much. And if we ever thought maybe Court Williams was a linebacker, it's like he's not a linebacker. But
even with that, they had way too many linebackers last year, to the point that still Chambers was not acknowledging it. I'm more comfortable with this year's linebacker depth than I was last year when they had more names in the room.
Because we know more about Phil Chambers and Tommy.
Yeah, like way more. Like kudos to the linebackers, because I mean, at least since us 3 have been the cleveland.com beat for Ohio State football writing, the linebackers, it's been a couple of years here since the linebacker play has been in a position to even be in the top 5 of a list like this, let alone number 1 on a list like this.
Because a year ago, this would have been an interesting conversation, how we would have rated the depth, because we would have been saying of the linebackers last spring, man, they have a lot of guys. Who's good?
Yeah.
What is Tommy Eichenberg going to be really good? Is Steel Chambers going to be really good? And Gabe Powers and CJ Hicks were freshmen. What do you expect from them? And Chip Tratham, hasn't played the position in college before, but man, there's a lot of guys. So that's would have been an interesting way to think about it. Okay. So that's our top three. Fourth, the safeties at 8.7. Fifth, the quarterbacks at 7.3. Tied for sixth, the defensive line and the cornerbacks, both at 6.7. And then there is a big drop-off, Stephen, to the two groups that are at the bottom. It's the tight ends at 3.7 and the offensive line at 3.3. I guess we're not surprised by that, Stephen, but that is a significant drop from, 6.7 tied for sixth. Yeah, it was practically a 7. That's some decent confidence in the depth. And then we have two rooms where we're in the 3s.
I'm not shocked they're last. I'm a little appalled that they're that far deep into last, because that's not a good thing, because those are two positions that don't touch the ball a lot, but they're very vital to everything else Ohio State wants to do offensively. So it's cool that the quarterbacks and the running backs and wide receivers are as high as they are, but if the depth in the rooms of the tight ends and the offensive line is still this by the time they take the field for a real game, I don't know how much that is going to matter, because they can't execute a lot of this stuff.
Nathan, is this more, it's spring, it's some guys who haven't played a lot, they're working through stuff? Brian Hartline said the spring you're trying to find the 22 to 30 guys that you can believe in and play? Or how much should Buckeye Talk listeners be on alert of, man, I think there's going to be a depth issue in these two rooms that's going to continue through the 2023 season?
Well, I mean, we can do this exercise again in the fall, and it'll be more useful in some ways at that point, because right now, if we were to present this to the Ohio State coaches, they'd be like, yeah, what do you think we're doing this spring? Like, we're trying to build depth in the offensive line. We're trying to build depth. We're trying to get these tight ends to come around. We're trying to get this defensive line going. Like, they're addressing these things. These aren't like, it's not like nothing can be done to remedy these grades that we're giving here. So I would think that some of this offensive line stuff is like Carson Hinsman. Imagine if they weren't talking about Carson Hinsman the way that they are right now. What would this offensive line grade be? It might have been a 1 for some of us, like, because, or you know what I mean? Like, so, or if Matt Jones had gone to the NFL, like they're just like one spot away on the offensive line, one person away from some tough spots. But if we see something from Tegra Shabola, which you've already started to see a couple of things from him that maybe gives you more confidence at right tackle. If Josh Fryer continues to be somebody who builds a lot of confidence, I think that our scores for this could be different and more optimistic at those two positions when we get to the fall. And then also remember, as you already said, somebody already said, the portal could be a factor here and help them depth-wise before the end of the spring. Or at the end of the spring.
The Matt Jones not going to NFL point, to flip that real quick, since the Luke Whipper thing was kind of unexpected. If Luke Whipper hadn't have gone pro, would that have raised the confidence that much higher for you guys? Just given the position he plays.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Because we've been talking about, I think, about Carson Hinsman as like a young guy that they believe in who can be their sixth guy. Although you'd still have the same questions at tackle.
That's why, it might only raise it by like 1.5 points for me because of that. It still doesn't solve the who's protecting the quarterbacks back and front the same way.
You'd still know that you'd know that you have two guys on your line who are a year away from the NFL, and Matt Jones, a guy who will take a good shot at it. Like that would still be 60% as opposed to 40, which is where you are right now.
All right, just to run through it one more time. Linebackers, 9.7. Running backs and receivers, 9. Safeties, 8.7. Quarterbacks, 7.3. Defensive line and cornerbacks, 6.7. Tight ends, 3.7. Offensive line, 3.3. Those are our depth ratings for the position rooms at Ohio State. We hope that helped you guys. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you're reading cleveland.com/OSU, and maybe you'll try the text at 614-350-3315. For now, for Nathan Baird and for Stephen Means, I'm Doug Maurice, and that was Buckeye Talk.